really interesting conversations today. And you know, the focus has all been on education and learning. And what I wanted to talk about for this session was, what is an assessment and why should we care? Why should we have an assessment? And really, I think the thing is you've got to think about the fact that we're all learning. Whether we like it or not, we're all learning. Our focus is to make sure that we're learning the right things in the right way. And for some kids, they really struggle with this and they don't learn, and they look at the person next door and they wonder how on earth they're able to learn so easily and yet I can't. And that frustration can be felt by the student themselves, by the teachers, and by the parents. And it can lead to anxiety, avoidance, truancy, depression, all sorts of things. So one of the things that we really have to work on doing is trying to understand where the breakdown is happening and what we can do to support this child and help them maximize their learning. I like to think about, change slide, it's not going to, hello, why won't it, there we go, sorry. I like to think about a kitchen stool. Now, in order to sit on this stool correctly, you need it to be on a level playing field. You need 4 legs, which are fixed and firm and steady, and then that way you'll have a balanced seat at the top that you can happily sit on. I like to think about the base, the floor, as being the sensory information, the way we process information, the income of language and information is through the senses. So having a level playing field on the sensory side of it is super important. The next thing we need is actually 4 legs that are the same length and the same strength and fixed firmly to that seat. So actually you're going to be able to sit on that stool correctly. And I tend to think about one leg, I like to think about one leg as being our core potential. What size is the engine in our bonnet? What would we expect to be able to achieve? Another leg I think of as being our processing system. And that includes memory, processing speed, and all of those kind of things that we need to help us access that potential and turn it into learning. We also need leg number 3 to be able to pay attention, to know what to focus on, to know how to transition from one activity to another, to know what to ignore. And that comes into our executive functioning and our attention. And those are super important as supporting tools, if you like, to help us access our potential. Finally, we need to really make sure that we're thinking about our mental and emotional well-being. So we have to think about the whole child. And if we've got all 4 of those legs secure and strong and the same length, we're likely to have that level playing field that we can sit on and learn from. The trouble is, with a car, we can just open the bonnet and tinker the engine and figure out why it's not working properly and tighten this and loosen that and fix the other. And we can't do the same thing for our own brains. We can't kind of get a cauliflower like Martin did to show us our brain and unpick the florets. So we have to find other ways to actually figure out how we're learning, where we're learning, what we're learning, or what we're not using effectively. What part of our brain is not working as it should? Or is it working? It's just that we don't have that much potential there in the first place. I like to think about the engine of the bonnet as being our core potential. Have you got a VX in your garden, or have you got a motorbike, or is it something in between that's parked in your garage? We also need, it's no good just having the size of the engine. You also need to have your tires and a steering wheel, fuel in the tank. All of those need to come into play in order to access that potential and turn it into learning. Remember, it's all very well having a VX parked in the car park, but if you've got no wheels on that car or no fuel in the tank, it's not going to get you to the shops or anywhere. So you've got to have those processing systems in place to actually allow you to take advantage and make the most of that potential that you've got under your bonnet. once you've got that information, once you understand where the breakdown is happening and why the breakdown is happening, you can then target that intervention and really focus on fixing what needs to be fixed. So knowledge, as I said, is power. And by using what we know and what we understand and the knowledge we get from an assessment, we can really focus on a guided intervention for a student, which is going to help us maximize their potential and really help them make the most of their learning. And by knowing what's breaking down, we know which bolt to tighten or which belt to replace, because we've got an understanding of how we're going, where the breakdown is happening and what we need to do to help this child maximize their learning. It's all very well getting an assessment done, but then this report comes back and it's usually lots of pages of really scary numbers and long words, which are quite technical and difficult to understand. And what I wanted to do now is just give you a little bit of an idea of how you can actually think about some of this information. The curve of normal distribution that you can see on the screen at the moment is a really useful tool to help us visualize what we're talking about and what the numbers mean and where we're trying to get the numbers to. You can see that the majority of us are in the average range, which is why it has a bulge and it's why it's shaped like a bell. That bulge in the middle is the average, and that's really where the majority of people turn out. And it doesn't matter whether you're measuring the size of the shoes of the people in your class or the height of the people in your gym class. Majority of people are actually going to end up in the average range. Now, generally, we work on using a standardized score, which is where we've taken that raw data and we've normed it, we've shared it and compared it to a population that you belong to, whether it's your age population. We might have other things that come in as well, things like if you are known to have a disability, we may include that in that data, but essentially that population, and it allows us to compare you to what we would expect you to be able to achieve. The one at the bottom, the percentile, is really quite useful because that also is another tool that helps us understand where you go. So if you are at the 25th percentile, that will mean, let me just get the laser pointer up, I've now found it. That means that you are performing 25%, hang on, let me reword this. 25%, it's always difficult to explain it. Let me try doing it at the 95. If you were doing 98%, you are doing 98% better than the rest of that population. And there's only 2% of them that's better than you. So as you go higher, obviously your percentile gets higher. Down here, this fellow down here, when you are at 2%, you're actually only achieving better than 98% of the population. So that percentile is a really useful way. But note how broad the group is for the average 25 to 74 percentile. It's not percent, it's percentile. It's a little bit different. So let's just have a look at some profiles to try and help you understand kind of what it looks like and what we're looking for when we're trying to interpret a report. So this is kind of like a bird's eye view of a profile, a student's profile. And the green strip down the middle, that's the average range. So that would be the bulge of the bell curve, okay? Few people above, few people below. Sadly, in this situation, we can see that the first message that's coming out of this is that we've got a student that's got really low potential. And this is going to be a tough message for the parents. It's a fairly balanced profile. It's all there's no real scatter, so there's good news there, but sadly it is all in the low range there. So really a lot of it here is going to be helping your parents become accepting of the message and becoming realistic of expectations for the student, and looking at the fact that we really need to be working towards life skills here. This student is not going to be a doctor, and we need to make sure that they've develop the skills that they can to really survive and get by and be as independent as they can. Now, I'm not saying that this is their lot for life, because profiles will change and we can work towards influencing and changing them. But one has to be realistic, and the honesty is that you're not going to get these buttons up here. So while we might be able to shoot some of them up these confident bands that you can see into below the average range so that they can achieve much more than they are at the moment, we've still got to be a little bit more realistic about their expectations. Let me take a moment to explain the different buttons. These three top ones here, those are the core composite skills. So we're looking at verbal ability, non-verbal ability, and spatial ability. The yellow dots here are the skills that give us those composite scores. So you will have 2 skills that we test for verbal, 2 skills that we test for non-verbal, 2 skills that we test for spatial. And you'll find that really it's we look at your knowledge base and your ability to apply and use that knowledge base. So for example, with the verbal ability, we would look at your word knowledge. How many words do you know? But we would also look at your ability to take those words and use them to analyze and interpret and reason with them. The buttons at the bottom down here is a quick look snapshot at your processing system. And I'm actually going to go on to the next picture, because that gives us a little bit more information. Yes, you might say, this student, not such a worry. There's lots of dots in the average range. So what's going on here, and what are you worried about, and why have we got a problem with this student? Well, look at the scatter. I mean, you've got a score down here that's in the superior range. You've got a score here that's below, is in the poor range. And that scatter is what's really causing issues for us. Now, remember, we talked about the verbal ability, the non-verbal ability, and the spatial ability. Now, your non-verbal and your spatial abilities will often come together to give us your special non-verbal composite score. What is your potential without the support of language? Take language out of it, and where are you? Now, we can't actually do that here because we've got a significant discrepancy between his non-verbal reasoning ability and his spatial. So your ability and your non-verbal reasoning ability is really your ability to make sense of patterns and sequences without the support of language. So take away the words, and what can you see? And your student that has challenges with a non-verbal reasoning, that's also going to come into play with their social ability to read non-verbal communication, tone of voice, facial expressions, body language. A lot of that's going to go straight over their heads. Now, that non-verbal is what we call your fluid reasoning, and it is really indicative of the size of the engine in the bonnet, if you like. We can't influence that nearly as much as we can influence your verbal and spatial reasoning abilities. So while we can maximize and really build and support your verbal and spatial abilities, there's only so much we can do for your non-verbal reasoning. Sounds like we've got somebody who's joined us, which is it's not on my side. So when we come to break down, if we know that your challenges are with your non-verbal reasoning, then we can work at maximizing your processing systems and maximizing your verbal and spatial so that they can support your non-verbal reasoning and help compensate for that difficulty. The interesting thing here, maybe that person could turn their mic off so we're not listening to their child's chatter. Or is it only me hearing it? I can't hear you. Never mind. Carry on. I'm used to having kids. We love kids. The interesting thing here is that we've got a huge, huge scatter in the in his processing systems here. And this one is really interesting here because this is the processing speed, but only where we've got motor fluency and visual spatial and some shallow processing. You bring language into the equation on this student, and we look at the rapid automatic naming or naming facility, and this button here shoots right back down here into the non-verbal, into the below average poor range. So we know that this student has got significant challenges with processing speed when language is involved. And as we can see that his verbal language is already in the low average range, we're starting to get an idea that language is an issue with this student. But a slow processing speed is massively challenging when it comes to supporting and coping in a mainstream classroom, because you're constantly playing catch up. Have you ever listened to a new YouTube video with it on time and a half, and the person's talking really, really fast like this, and you can't really keep up with them? That's kind of what it's like for some of these students. The speed of information is coming at them so fast, they don't have time to grab it, consolidate it, set the memory, and move on. And they're constantly being left behind. Those are often the kids that are misunderstood as having a poor attention. They don't have a poor attention. They're concentrating. They're just 2 or 3 steps behind the rest of the class. So it's no good telling them to pay attention. They really are, but they're inside their heads trying to play catch up. So an assessment is going to help you figure that out and find out that it's not an attention deficit. It's a processing speed problem, or it's not a non-verbal reasoning ability or a poor emotional intelligence. It's something else. So really understanding what is going on and looking at the breakdown is super important. Look at this student. Well, look at all those buttons above the average range. Why on earth are we having a problem with this student? They've got a profile. Look at that non-verbal reasoning. It's in the superior range, and yet they are having a learning challenge. Look down here at their processing, and specifically look at this one and this one. It is their immediate verbal memory when they have a visual trigger, and delayed. So given time to take that information, consolidate it, figure it out, and then return and remember it, and oh my goodness, do they have a good memory. But you ask them to recall it straight away and they're flummoxed. They don't have time. And it's because their processing speed is a little bit compromised. And although here it looks as if it's in the average range, when you look at it in 2 or 3 other, because invariably I will use 2 or 3 other tools to actually compare, and we can see, especially when it comes to naming facility, crashes and burns. So he has to have time to consolidate this information, figure it all out, make the connections, set the memory, and then move forward. Wouldn't have known that if we didn't have this profile to look at. Okay. The other one here that's super important is that working memory. And we can see again, the impact of processing speed on his working memory means that it's really affected. And of course, working memory is the one memory that we need to have on board when we're in the classroom, being able to shift and transition and have the immediate information available for us. The other advantage to an assessment is that we can then use this as a baseline that we can then use to monitor our progress. It's no good having an assessment if we then don't take that information and do something with it. By having that baseline, we can then target that intervention, and then by monitoring our progress, we can see whether we're actually achieving anything with that intervention. And you can see here, this student has made super progress on their ability to show emotions in different environments. But oh my goodness, we need to have a look at what we did to try and sort out influence, because of here we've got a situation where they've actually gone backwards. So we need to look at what strategy we were using and rethink it so that we can see what progress is making. If we can see that the intervention is working, we know to carry on using it. If we can see it's not working, we know we have to change something. By working with an assessment and by using it to drive our intervention and to inform our intervention, we know what we have to do. We can then think about how we're going to intervene and how we're going to support it. We can also look at and think about making sure that we're looking at the whole child and making sure that we are intervening and balancing our interventions. It's no good just focusing on the academics. We do also have to think about Emotional, remember the 4 legs. We have to think about attention. We have to think about executive functioning. We have to think about sensory and the senses. We have to think about these soft skills, their emotional regulation, their social interaction. And if we are watching all of these skills and working on all the individual skills that we've monitored, that we've assessed and targeted for intervention, 9 times out of 10, we're going to start seeing the learning is going to drop into place, and we're going to start seeing some success here. So let's just think back over what we've been talking about. Knowledge is power. It allows us to make informed and targeted interventions. It allows us to understand where the breakdown is happening with these students. It allows us to know the child's cognitive potential. Are they actually able to perform? Should we be expecting more of them, or are they actually already performing beyond potential? And once you can get parents to understand, well, this is where we would expect them to be, and this is where they're performing, then they can start understanding what's going on. Likewise, teachers can have an understanding of what can we expect this student to do and to perform and to be able to achieve and to be able to understand. And where, if there is a discrepancy and if there is a breakdown, and if intervention is not making a difference, if even targeted intervention is not making a difference, we know something is going on. So if we know that a student has been raised in an enriched language environment and there's had lots of immersion and good quality learning in language, they've got a verbal ability that is below the average range, we know something is going on and there's something we need to do about it. Processing systems, like I said, it's no good having that engine in the bonnet of your car if you've got no wheels on it. It's not taking you anywhere. And that processing is super important. So your speed of information is really one of the most important. And imagine, let's go back to the car. You're cruising down the highway, you've got nobody in the car, music's full volume. How much effort is it taking you just to cruise down that road? Probably not very much. But as soon as you start filling the car up with people, putting luggage in the boot, possibly there becomes an incline. How quickly does that car slow down? How much effort do you have to use to try and maintain the pace that you are making? And it's the same to some extent with your processing speed. Please yell at me when I'm running out of time. I'm coming to an end now. Questions coming up just now. So your processing is super important, your attention and the executive functioning and that executive functioning, that ability to shift and to transition, to know the cause and the effect and to understand what's going on behind. These things are all super important. And of course, we must remember to look at the whole child, understand their developmental age. Where are they at? What would we expect? Is this just an anomaly that they may grow through and we're looking at a picture of their developmental stage? What is their historical background? And I'm going to stop, and I'm on time for 5 minutes of questions. Over to the floor.
Thank you ever so much, Scilla. That was absolutely outstanding what you